Support for Louisiana, the state we're in, is provided by...
Every day, I go to work for Entergy.
I know customers are counting on me.
So Entergy is investing millions of dollars
to keep the lights on
and installing new technology
to prevent outages before they happen.
Together,
we power life.
Additional support provided by the Fred B. and Ruth B. Ziegler Foundation and the Ziegler Art Museum located in Jennings City Hall. The museum focuses on emerging Louisiana artists and is an historical and cultural center for Southwest Louisiana. And the Foundation for Excellence in Louisiana Public Broadcasting, with support from viewers like you.
But there's some cases, one from Alabama, one from Louisiana, which could set really interesting precedents.
This isn't the first time Louisiana has challenged the notion of race.
To the extent that humanity has a fighting chance against carbon in the atmosphere, it's in the water.
Is water the future of carbon capture?
The problem is the cybersecurity problem grows as the number of people that we output grows.
The challenges of cybersecurity. An integral part of Black Greek culture explained.
Tonight we begin with new data that shows Louisiana students are still scoring below the national average in 4 subjects, but there is a small glimmer of hope.
Yeah, a slight bit of celebration here. 4th graders scored 2 percentage points higher on the reading on the National Assessment of Educational Progress testing.
Louisiana is one of only 2 states to show improvement in reading following the pandemic.
And now on to other news making headlines around the state.
New Orleans Sewerage and Water Board is considering a rate increase despite years of public outcry about high water bills. The last rate increase was approved in 2012, with annual 10% increases going through 2020. Mayor LaToya Cantrell gave strong support for the increase at a meeting this week. She says it's necessary to fund critical maintenance and upgrades. Some city council officials say they are not going to approve any increase until billing issues have been resolved.
Redrawing Louisiana's congressional map was under heated debate during session this year. The new map garnered criticism for limiting the black vote, but the decision was ultimately left to the Supreme Court to decide how the districts would look. More controversy has emerged this week as Republican officials asked the U.S. Supreme Court to set a narrower definition of black for redistricting in Louisiana. Joining me to talk about the impact of this potential change is Jim Inkster, who is a political analyst. Thank you so much for joining me, Jim.
Good to be with you, Kara.
All right, so let's backpedal a little bit. Why is the U.S. Supreme Court being asked to redefine what's considered black and what isn't?
Louisiana and Alabama have cases before the court determining congressional districts, and an argument can be made, some would say convincingly, that blacks are underrepresented in both states because there is a big proportion, not a majority, but a strong minority of black citizens, 33% in Louisiana, and 1/3 of our districts would mean that we are underrepresented because we only have 1 out of 6, and we should, based on the numbers, if we're just doing raw numbers, have 2 out of 6. So these numbers actually matter. Now the question is whether this new look that the Secretary of State, Kyle Ardoin, is asking for will really make a difference, because based on the early reading, it only includes people who identify as black, white, and Latino. So it wouldn't involve a lot of people, but cases like these set precedents and usually involve cases that might go before the court at a future time. So it could be a significant case before the court, and it involves us right here in Louisiana.
So first, who is considered black in Louisiana?
In Louisiana, we have a long tortured history in that realm. In 1970, the legislature passed a law saying if a person is 1/32nd black, then they're black, which would mean you'd have to go back to a great-grandparent who was black for that to happen, and anybody under that category would be considered black. Now, in 1983, that was overturned. Now, the way these numbers are determined is through the census. And if somebody checks off that they're black and white, they're still considered to be black. And now this new wrinkle is the people who check black, white, and Latino The Republican Party in Louisiana believes they should not be considered black. And elections are won at the margins, and sometimes these percentages mean something, and this is something that they've decided to take issue with.
And I know you've mentioned this before, but like you said, Louisiana is about 33% black, and I believe most of those people identify as monoracial. They're not Afro-Latino, and they're not, considering themselves biracial. So why, again, why pursue? What's the point of this pursuit?
Well, it's all about politics, and most of us are part black or white if we live in Louisiana. That's the nature of being here, and the question is, how do we identify? But unfortunately, in politics, we're now voting along racial lines extensively. 95% of the black citizens voted against Donald Trump twice. 85% of the white citizens in Louisiana voted for him twice. So these numbers have a politically charged element to them, and it's all about winning elections. And ultimately, I think that's the underlying current behind this new wrinkle in determining who is white and who is black.
Well, originally, whenever people were bringing up the congressional map, and they had a lot of criticism behind it, one of the biggest arguments was that it was a violation of the Voting Rights Act. Mm-hmm. So if we redefine what is considered black, does that argument still matter?
The Voting Rights Act would seem to indicate, as Judge Shelley Dick ruled, that Louisiana is not in compliance. Now, the Supreme Court has a case before it not only from Louisiana but also from Alabama, in which they could throw out Section 2. And if they do that, then it really won't matter. In this case, won't matter because race will not be a factor. And that's exactly what the state of Alabama is asking for, saying that in drawing congressional lines that race should not even be a factor. But as we know, in the South, we have a long, tortured history with race, and some people believe we're not past it yet and that we need some kind of structure that is imposed on us from the federal government. But there are some cases, one from Alabama, one from Louisiana, which could set really interesting precedents.
So in conclusion, this isn't new. We've done this a couple times in Louisiana, defining who's black and who isn't for political reasons. And I guess this is just the next argument, the next decision.
In Louisiana, we have a history of racially charged politics, where the state that, as a people, gave 60% of the white vote to David Duke for U.S. Senate in 1990. 55% of the white vote went to him when he ran for governor a year later. And without the votes from black citizens, we would have had both governor and U.S. Senator David Duke. So some people believe that black citizens are worthy of being counted, and sometimes make decisions that are in the best interest.
Well, thank you so much for joining us and talking about this topic. We'll see what unravels from here.
Thank you, Kara. It's going to be a fascinating few months.
All right, thanks, Joe.
And now the second part of our series on carbon capture, a company at the forefront of setting new standards for carbon capture and removal by accelerating natural processes with water at the center of it. I talked with Ayal Harel of Blue Green Water Technologies.
The way we as a humanity, trying to combat the carbon in the atmosphere has been by many different ways. One way was to try and reduce our reliance on fossil fuel. And we've seen a lot of efforts by many of the energy companies to move away from the use of coal, for example, and start, buying offshore wind farms and solar power and whatnot. And it's a very good approach. It makes sense. That's the way to go. And it does reduce their overall carbon footprint. However, it has to be pointed out as well that even that has a carbon footprint, because to build those farms, to operate those farms, everything has a carbon footprint. And this is in a first world country. Take the rest of the world. The rest of the world is basically reliant on fossil fuel for its existence, for its development. You cannot take it away from them. They will not give it away. Okay, let's be practical here. So fossil fuel is here to stay in this form or another, and ultimately carbon footprint is out there big time. One of the examples is you can take any of the service companies, big banks, for example, they're not responsible for directly releasing any fossil fuel-based emissions anywhere, and yet their carbon footprint is quite significant. Why? Because they have a lot of people in fancy infrastructure driving around, flying around, and all this. It builds up to a significant amount of emissions, and this is something that needs to be handled. Where humanity really stands a fighting chance, it's not on land, it's in water. For the simple reason that by design, the way the world works is the oceans and the lakes, or water in general, is where carbon goes to sleep. Water regulates carbon in the atmosphere. 83% of all carbon in the atmosphere circulates through water. And it's not through the properties of water in and of itself. It's through little creatures that are called microalgae, microscopic algae, that is so effective in capturing carbon that it is also responsible for 50% of all the oxygen we breathe on Earth, despite the fact that when you compare it to trees on Earth, it's 0.5% of all the green in the water. It's that little amount of biomass that generates all that oxygen. It's just that effective. We came from the attempt to control a water pandemic, which is based on those microalgae that overpopulates. Now, when it overpopulates, that's a problem. I equate it to a cancerous tumor. It's what is known as a nature-based carbon removal system that is actually a problem you want to get rid of. So imagine you have this cancerous tumor, which is in the form of a lot of biomass that captures fantastic amounts of carbon in the process of growing out of control. And we're able to come and trigger a biological chain of events within those toxic communities that causes them completely to collapse. You suddenly have a huge amount of biomass and carbon within that biomass that drops to the bottom and buries in the sediment. More importantly, parts of it actually undergoes mineralization, so the carbon turns into lime. The rest of it will lie on the floor of the ocean and the lake until, after a millennia, will turn into oil and natural gas. This is how oil and natural gas were made, through ancient algae and cyanobacteria dying, dropping to the bottom, and through certain chemical processes turning into those substances, oil and natural gas, which is why when we burn them, we release all that carbon. Our treatment is a very surgical approach. We take a very surgical approach, again, to trigger a biological and natural process. It's as if we're pressing a red button within the toxic communities that causes the entire toxic community to collapse. What happens immediately after is that there is no vacuum in nature. As those communities collapse with all the carbon that is accumulated in them, you will start seeing immediately a rebound in beneficial, non-toxic species such as green algae and diatoms. I don't want to get too technical, but essentially we are rehabilitating the water column. We are reintroducing biodiversity to the environment. The part where it gets tricky is how do you calculate exactly how much carbon we have removed through this process? And this is not an easy task by any stretch. We are in the process of defining a methodology to calculate how much carbon is being sequestered in the process of a harmful algal bloom remediation. It's a long process. It needs to be validated by the scientific community. It's not a simple one. We're expecting this to take between 1.5 to 2 years to be accomplished. But the important thing, and I'm putting here aside Blue-Green's interest, I'm saying, again, to the extent that humanity has a fighting chance against carbon in the atmosphere, it's in the water. Whether it's us through our technology, whether it's us through our methodology, the efforts and the focus needs to move to where it really counts, because right now, all the efforts, all the money is pouring to places where the impact is just negligible in absolute terms.
Got it. Okay. So water's the answer, whether it's you or somebody else finding out the technology and the ratio that works.
Correct.
And Harrell is talking with Louisiana officials about some of their plans for carbon capture. The NSA has designated LSU as one of about 20 top universities to study cybersecurity. Here's Professor Golden Richard.
And we join roughly 20 schools nationwide now that are designated. And those schools are essentially schools that are teaching very high-tech cybersecurity. One differentiator is having classes in research in malware analysis. So this means like computer viruses and ransomware and all the stuff that people hear about in the news all the time. Having classes that do deeply technical instruction in that area in particular is a differentiator. And there just aren't that many people teaching classes like that. And there's a bit of warfare as schools try to steal each other's faculty to grab someone who can teach that and then perhaps go after the designation.
Is it hard to keep up with what you need to teach?
It is hard. It is hard to keep up. So every day is a new day. It's not quite starting from scratch, but yeah, if you don't if you don't want to learn new things every day, it's a terrible field to be in.
I mean, it would be opposite of teaching Louisiana history or something, right?
Yes, or calculus or something. Yeah. The impact on Louisiana is that students that are going to study cybersecurity often use that list of schools as essentially a shopping list to find schools that they want to study at. It also opens up new funding sources for LSU and just the fact that we can say we're one of 20.
Job security is also tremendous for someone studying this and wanting this to be their field of work.
Yes, there's zero unemployment. With estimates between, say, 200,000 and 1 million empty seats with no one to sit there.
And is that because there aren't enough programs to teach, or just too many things happening
It's too many things happening. It's a fun yet difficult field. And, we're trying to catch up by creating new programs nationwide. The problem is the cybersecurity problem grows as the number of people that we output grows. There's a lot of just standard cyber hygiene things that you've been told many, many times not to click on strange email attachments and stuff. I mean, the work that we're doing here is to develop systems that can take some of the burden off of you and protect you more, and so you have to worry essentially less about what you're clicking on.
When you teach a class on that, how is that instruction done?
So just to take one example, we teach a class on malware analysis, so that's understanding computer viruses. So essentially on the first day, students get a big printout of the code of a computer virus, and their task is to start understanding exactly how it works. So you're essentially thrown in the deep end and learn on the job. And for the most part, by the time that semester class is over, the average person coming out of the class has a pretty good handle on how to take apart malware. Now, they had a lot more self-study to do, right, and more learning, but they have a good basis for getting started.
LSU also offers an online cybersecurity boot camp to help give you tools to fight cybercrime. You can check out more at lsu.edu.
When you think of Black Greeks, the first thing that probably comes to mind is stepping or strolling. These are two art forms that are very unique to the Black experience, but they didn't originate in America, at least not fully. Tonight, in the very last episode of Crossing Over Black Greek Life, we explore this very sacred expression of culture.
These movements are precise, rhythmic, synchronizing with a beat made entirely by hands and feet. We've seen it in a lot of media, and it's iconic for a reason. Stepping and strolling are what most people think of when they hear the phrase Black Greek life. It's almost synonymous with the name. But what is it? Why do they do it? I met up with Terrell Carter, the president of the Omicron Beta Sigma chapter of Phi Beta Sigma. He knows all about the history of this art form. So when people think of Black Greek life, the first thing that a lot of people think of is stepping, dancing, all of these things. But can you explain in your words, what is stepping?
Stepping is an expression, right? It's an expression of sound, of art, of creativity, of imagination, all wrapped into one ball, right? There's a lot of thought that goes into step because you have to marry all of those things into one accord, whether it's your feet, your hands, your voice, the different taps, the different basses. You have to make sure that all of those things fall in the right spot at the right time, and everyone is doing the exact same thing. And so from an expression standpoint, it really has been a way for Black Greek-led organizations to express themselves and also bring a little attention to what they're doing, who they are, and where they come from.
Does every organization step?
Once you become a member, you tend to do it, whether it's doing your probate or neophyte show, is what we call them now. You do the signature step. So you have, even if you don't step at all after that, you have your opportunity to get that step in, to make sure that you kind of take hold of the tradition and show people exactly what you can do.
Wait a second. Probate? Neophyte? What does that even mean?
Now, stepping really dates back to when people were pledging, and in the 1960s, those persons were called probates. They were on probation. They had limited contact with their friends and peers outside of that process. They were all in terms of joining their organization. Toward the end of that process, those new members then had a performance. So the probates then would get together and they would be formally presented to the campus. This was really the only time we saw this kind of self-expression with these groups. And they had dances that they did. A lot of times they would use the popular music of the day and change the lyrics so that it would be an ode to their organizations. Out of those presentations came stepping going into the 1970s. And so we start to see now this emergence of this new art form.
Okay, so stepping is just a way to showcase I am now a part of this organization and I'm proud of it. These are my letters.
Yeah, see me. Right?
See me.
This is who I am.
But the roots of this art form have nothing to do with neophyte shows or initiations. It was all about communication. South African miners used the sound of their hands and gumboots to send messages to each other underground during the apartheid. Sometimes they'd attach bells to their feet or hands to amplify the noise.
It was their language to alert the other miners that they were doing well, that they were alive, to check on them, to keep their spirits high. It was almost like singing the hymn, but you can't sing, so you're making the beat, and you just, if you're on a miner in a different area and you hear it, then you know that that group is okay, that group is doing well. They're trying to encourage you to continue working, that it'll all be over soon, because we are Black Greek-led organizations, and a lot of the history and the traditions and the heritage that we have comes from our ancestors. That's kind of the way that art form has transformed and gone through generations to where it is now, to where it's almost the same thing, right? We communicate with our steps to the audience, to other Greek organizations, to our brothers and sisters in Greek life. Just say, this is who we are, this is what we've been doing, this is what we do as a whole, and to express ourselves, right? So it hadn't gone too far from the origin.
The gumboot dance represented a type of Black unity Greeks were desperately trying to capture. By the 60s and 70s, they were redefining themselves and their Blackness. Movement was the best way to do that. So members adopted the gumboot dance and added their own identity to it. That's when you start to see the iconic hand signs and gestures and the poses.
It's just now it's very evolved. It's a lot of things that go into it now that wasn't back then.
And depending on what type of show it is, you are telling a story.
Yeah, absolutely.
Step shows can range in their storytelling. You can see a critique of the world or a comedic number about Michael Jackson. But no step showcase would be complete without a stroll. So this is where people, well, non-Greeks get kind of confused. So they're stepping and then they're strolling. What's the difference?
So stepping is, like I said, it's building a rhythm or a beat with your hands, your feet, your mouth. Whereas strolling, you're not necessarily dependent upon yourself being the instrument, right? When you're strolling to a song or a recorded beat that's already there for you. So you're literally just filling the gaps with, creative dance.
Strolling was originally called the party walk. It was a unified dance that Greeks did at parties. It started as just one dance for Greeks to show off their letters and moves, but then it turned into almost a necessity.
I think around maybe late 90s, early 2000s is when you really started seeing that strolling was catching up with stepping. And I would say 2000 and, showing my age, 2007-ish, 8-ish was when you started noticing, like, instead of having step shows, you had stroll-offs. And people were putting a lot of time into coming up with strolls because they wanted to perform.
Strolling and stepping are now an integral part of this Greek tradition. And nothing compares to the first time I saw it when I was a kid. I don't think anyone can prepare for the explosion of culture you see when you sit down to watch a show. But it fills me with absolute joy that this art form will live on for generations to come.
That was the very last episode of this series, and I learned so much about culture and history every time I put these together, and I'm so honored that I get to take you all on this journey with me. It was great working with you.
I did also. I think everyone watching did.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. That was great. Hey, and thanks for everybody. That's our show for this week. Remember, you can watch anything LPB anytime, wherever you are, with our LPB PBS app.
You can catch LPB news and public affairs shows, as well as other Louisiana programs you've come to enjoy over the years. And please like us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram.
For everyone here at Louisiana Public Broadcasting, I'm Andre Morrow.
And I'm Kara St. Cyr.
Until next time, that's the state we're in.
Support for Louisiana, the state we're in, is provided by...
Every day, I go to work for Entergy.
I know customers are counting on me.
So Entergy is investing millions of dollars
to keep the lights on
and installing new technology
to prevent outages before they happen.
Together,
we power life.
Additional support provided by the Fred B. and Ruth B. Ziegler Foundation and the Ziegler Art Museum located in Jennings City Hall. The museum focuses on emerging Louisiana artists and is an historical and cultural center for Southwest Louisiana. And the Foundation for Excellence in Louisiana Public Broadcasting, with support from viewers like you.